A CEO saw a single mom struggling to carry her sick child onto a crowded bus, and in that moment, he did something no one expected. He stopped his car. He helped her inside, and instead of driving away, he took them straight to the hospital, staying until the little boy was safe. It was a chance encounter on a rainy evening, but what happened the very next day would change all of their lives forever. Before we dive into the story, I'd love to know, where are you watching from right now? Drop it down in the comments, because it's always amazing to see how these stories reach people from every corner of the world. It was a rainy evening in the city. The streets glistened under the fading glow of street lamps, and the air carried that damp chill that slips beneath the skin, settling heavy into tired bones. At the bus stop stood Elena Carter, a young mother whose life had been marked by quiet sacrifices. In her arms, she cradled her little boy, his forehead hot with fever, his small body limp and restless against her chest. She tried to shield him from the drizzle with a frayed scarf, but the fabric was already damp, clinging uselessly to her shoulders. The bus approached with a groan of brakes, headlights scattering across the wet pavement. Doors swung open, releasing a stream of passengers who hurried past, umbrellas dripping, shoes splashing against the puddles. Elena gathered her strength, gripping the rail with one trembling hand while holding her son with the other. She tried to step forward, but her body was weak, her arms heavy from exhaustion. Around her, people flowed like a current. Some glanced briefly in her direction, but most looked away, too consumed by their own rush to notice. For a moment, it seemed as though no one would, and then someone did. A black car slowed by the curb, its polished frame glistening beneath the rain. Behind the wheel sat Adrian Blake, a man whose life existed in a world far from this street corner. He was a name whispered in boardrooms, a figure known for wealth and authority. But in that moment, none of that mattered. Through the rain-streaked window, his gaze fell on the young mother struggling to climb aboard the crowded bus, her face pale with worry, her child's small hand clutched against her heart. Adrian's chest tightened. What he saw was not simply a stranger. He saw resilience. He saw love. He saw a mother fighting with everything she had left. He pulled the car over, stepped out into the rain, and in that instant made a choice. A choice that would ripple far beyond that wet evening, altering not just his life, but hers. What unfolded that night was only the beginning. Because the very next day, Adrian Blake would make a decision that would change Elena's future and her son's, in ways neither of them could have imagined. Elena Carter's story did not begin on that rainy evening. It began long before in the quiet, unseen battles of everyday life. She was in her late 20s, though the weight of responsibility often made her feel older. Blonde hair that once shone like sunlight was now tied back in practical knots, strands falling loose around a face that carried both beauty and exhaustion. Her green eyes still held light, soft, steady, hopeful, but anyone who looked closely could see the shadows beneath them. Elena had not chosen this path willingly. Life had chosen it for her. A love that had once promised forever had left her standing alone, a newborn in her arms, and no map for what came next. Since then, her days have been a balancing act. Working long shifts, managing bills that always seemed larger than her paycheck, and keeping her son's laughter alive despite the hardships pressing in. The small apartment where they lived was modest, walls thin enough to hear neighbors' televisions, yet filled with warmth. She decorated it with little touches that made it feel like home. A chipped vase of flowers from the corner market, crayon drawings taped proudly to the fridge, a secondhand blanket draped over the couch where her son liked to curl up. To Elena, these small things mattered. They were proof that love could transform even the simplest space. Her son, Daniel, was the center of her world. Every decision, every sacrifice, every tired morning began and ended with him. He was only 6 years old, bright, curious, with a laugh that could light up even Elena's darkest days. But he had also been fragile, prone to colds and fevers that struck suddenly and worried her deeply. The night of the rainstorm was not the first time she carried him, burning with fever, praying she could get him help in time. And yet, despite the exhaustion, despite the loneliness, Elena carried herself with quiet strength. There was a grace in the way she moved through her days. Neighbors often saw her rushing to catch the bus, Daniel's small hand in hers. And though they may not have known her story, They noticed a gentleness in her smile. Inside, of course, there were moments of doubt, nights when bills piled high on the table, when she wondered how much longer she could stretch herself thin. There were evenings when Daniel was asleep, and she sat quietly in the kitchen, staring at her reflection in a cup of tea gone cold, wondering if she was enough. But then she'd hear the sound of her son's soft breathing from the next room, and the strength would return. Because for Elena, failure was not an option. Love demanded more than that. She was a mother who had given up her dreams, her comfort, even her health at times, so her child could have a chance. She was the kind of woman who went unnoticed by the world, yet carried within her resilience that could not be broken. And that is why, on that rainy evening, when Adrian Blake's eyes first fell upon her struggling to board that bus, he didn't just see a woman burdened by hardship. He saw a fighter. He saw someone whose strength was wrapped not in wealth or power, but in love. Elena Carter had lived years of sacrifice and silence, but fate was about to shift. Because the moment Adrian Blake stopped his car, her life was on the edge of a transformation she could never have imagined. The evening rain came down harder, drumming against rooftops and pooling along the edges of the sidewalks. Streetlights flickered across the wet pavement, their glow bending and breaking in the rippling puddles below. Cars passed quickly, wipers swiping furiously, their tires hissing as they cut through the water. At the bus stop, Elena shifted her son in her arms. Daniel's forehead was hot against her cheek, his breathing shallow, his little body trembling despite the blanket wrapped tightly around him. She whispered soft words into his ear, her voice soothing even as worry pressed against her chest. The bus finally arrived, brakes squealing, headlights scattering against the rain. People crowded forward, jostling for position beneath dripping umbrellas. Elena stepped into line, clutching Daniel closer, her other hand grasping the cold metal rail. Her foot touched the first step, but her strength faltered. The boy was too heavy, her arms too tired, and the crowd too impatient. A man brushed past without a glance. A woman muttered something under her breath. Irritated by the delay, Elena swallowed hard, blinking against tears that threatened to spill. She tried again, hoisting Daniel higher, her body trembling from the effort. The world around her felt blurred, muffled by rain and exhaustion. And then a moment of stillness. A sleek black car slowed to a stop by the curb. Inside, Adrian Blake gripped the wheel, his gaze fixed on the scene unfolding before him. He could have kept driving. After all, he had no reason to stop. His world was far removed from this. The polished offices, the endless meetings, the life of privilege that rarely touched the raw edges of struggle. But something in that instant struck him. Perhaps it was a desperation in Elena's eyes, the fierce way she clung to her son despite her exhaustion. Perhaps it was a quiet strength she carried, so clear even in her weakest moment. Whatever it was, he could not look away. Adrian pulled over. The hum of his engine quieted, the rain tapping against the roof of his car. For a heartbeat, he hesitated. This was not something CEOs did, was it? But his chest tightened, his decision already made. He stepped out into the rain. The cold hit him instantly, soaking to the fabric of his tailored coat. But he didn't care. He crossed a few steps toward the bus stop, his shoes splashing in the water. Elena froze when she saw him. Her arms instinctively pulled Daniel closer, as though shielding him from a stranger. But then she noticed a look in his eyes, not pity, not annoyance, but something deeper. Concern, determination. "Let me help," he said softly, his voice steady over the rush of rain. Elena hesitated. For so long, she had carried everything on her own. Help was something rarely offered, and even rarer to trust. Yet her body trembled, and Daniel whimpered against her chest. She had no strength left to refuse. Adrian extended his hand, firm and unwavering. "Please," he added, with a sincerity that cut through her walls. Finally, she let him take the weight, his arms sliding gently beneath Daniel, lifting the boy with surprising care. Elena followed quickly, clutching the blanket tighter around her son as Adrian guided them away from a crowded bus. The driver honked impatiently, the bus doors hissing shut as it pulled away. But Elena barely noticed. She was staring at the man before her, the stranger who had stepped out of his expensive car, now standing soaked in the rain, carrying her sick child as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Come with me," Adrian said firmly. "The hospital's close. I'll take you there now." Elena wanted to protest, to insist she didn't need charity, that she could manage, but her voice broke before the words could form. And in the quiet that followed, she realized this was not charity. This was kindness. She nodded, her eyes glistening, her throat too tight to speak. Adrian opened the passenger door of his car, helping her inside before carefully settling Daniel into her arms again. The warmth of the leather seats contrasted sharply with the cold rain still clinging to her clothes. When the engine purred to life, Elena felt the first fragile thread of relief unravel in her chest. As the city blurred past the windows, she glanced sideways at the man behind the wheel. His jaw was set, his eyes focused on the road, but there was a softness in his expression she couldn't ignore. That rainy evening, Adrian Blake had no idea why he had stopped. He couldn't have explained it if someone asked. All he knew was that the sight of a mother struggling alone had stirred something deep inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. And for Elena, sitting there in silence with her child pressed against her, she had no way of knowing that this simple act of compassion would set into motion a chain of events that would change her life forever. That night in the rain, two paths crossed, and nothing would ever be the same again. The city was quieting down for the evening when Adrian Blake returned home. His apartment, high above the skyline, was everything one might expect from a man of his position. Sleek, modern, filled with glass and polished steel. A place designed for comfort, for success, yet empty in a way he had never cared to admit. He set his keys on the counter, shrugged off his rain-soaked coat, and walked into the silence. Normally, he welcomed it. Silence was control. Silence was order after long days filled with board meetings, phone calls, and endless demands on his time. But tonight, the silence was different. Tonight, it pressed in on him, unwelcome, because in his mind, he could still see her. Elena Carter, the image of her standing at that bus stop, hair damp from the rain, arms trembling beneath the weight of her child, yet holding herself with a strength that humbled him. The sound of her son's weak cough echoed faintly in his memory, and it stirred something he couldn't shake. Adrian poured himself a glass of scotch, the amber liquid catching the city lights as he swirled it absently. He took a sip, but it did little to quiet his thoughts. He sat by the window, staring out at the endless sprawl of streets below. Cars moved like fireflies, people rushing home to families, to warmth. Family. It was a word Adrian had long since stopped thinking about. His life had been built on discipline, on relentless ambition, love, commitment, the vulnerability of connection. He had set those aside years ago, trading them for success. And yet, tonight, for the first time in a long time, he felt the absence of it. He leaned back, eyes closing, but rest refused him. He remembered the way Elena had looked at him when he lifted her son into his arms. Not with gratitude alone, but with hesitation, almost disbelief, as though kindness from a stranger was something rare, almost foreign. That look unsettled him. Adrian prided himself on being decisive, on moving forward without dwelling on emotions. But he couldn't stop wondering, what kind of life had forced a woman like Elena to stand in the rain, struggling alone, carrying so much weight without a single hand reaching to help? He set the glass down, untouched now. His thoughts drifted to Daniel, the boy's flushed face, his tiny frame wrapped tightly in that blanket. He hoped the doctors had helped, that Elena had found some relief once they'd reached the hospital. He almost wished he had stayed longer, waited for news. But he hadn't wanted to intrude, hadn't wanted her to feel he was crossing some invisible line. Still, as the hours passed, the unease remained. Adrian moved through his apartment restlessly, trying to bury himself in work, flipping open his laptop, scanning through emails, but the numbers blurred on the screen. The usual satisfaction of productivity never came. His mind refused to let go of the sight of that young mother and her child. For years, he had believed success was measured in deals closed, profits gained, empires built. But tonight, standing in his perfect apartment, Adrian felt an emptiness he couldn't ignore. The memory of Elena's determined green eyes seemed to ask him a question he had no answer for. What do you do when all your success means nothing in the face of someone else's struggle? The rain outside softened into a mist, city lights glowing against the wet streets. Adrian stood at the window, hands in his pockets, his reflection staring back at him. He didn't know why this woman, this stranger, had shaken him so deeply. All he knew was that her strength, her quiet resilience, had left a mark, and somewhere deep inside, he felt it, an urgency, a pull he couldn't explain. By the time he finally lay down, exhaustion pressing against him, the night was already half gone. He closed his eyes, but Elena and her child lingered there in the dark, more vivid than any dream. Adrian Blake had built a life where nothing and no one ever kept him awake at night. Until now, the morning after the storm carried a fragile kind of calm. The rain had passed, leaving the city washed clean, streets glistening under the pale light of dawn. In a modest hospital room, Elena sat beside her son's bed, watching him sleep. His fever had broken during the night. His breathing, once shallow and uneven, was now steady, soft, almost peaceful. Relief washed over her, though exhaustion clung heavy to her body. She brushed a strand of hair from his forehead, her hand lingering there as though her touch alone could shield him from every hardship in the world. For Elena, nothing else mattered. Not her own hunger, not the bills waiting at home, not the endless wait of tomorrow. In that moment, there was only Daniel, safe, resting, alive. She whispered a quiet prayer of thanks, not at anyone in particular, but to the universe itself. Then, as she leaned back in the stiff hospital chair, her mind wandered. She thought of the stranger from the night before, the man who had appeared out of nowhere, stepping out of rain with steady eyes and a voice that carried no judgment, only calm assurance. She still wasn't sure what to make of it. Of him. People like that, men in tailored coats driving sleek cars, they didn't stop for women like her. They didn't notice. And yet he had. She shook the thought away, forcing herself to focus on Daniel. The world would return soon enough. And indeed it did. Across town, Adrian Blake sat at his desk, though his mind wasn't on the papers before him. The city moved briskly outside his office window, employees hurrying to meetings, phones ringing, the machinery of business spinning as it always did. But for the first time in years, Adrian wasn't interested. His thoughts kept circling back to the image of Elena in the rain, the quiet strength in her face, the way she clutched her child with every ounce of what she had left. He had tried, all morning, to bury himself in work, tried to silence that persistent voice in his chest. But it was no use. Something about her had struck him, cut through the armor he had built around himself. He knew he couldn't just let it go. By midday, his decision was made. He had the resources, the influence, the ability to change things for her, and not out of pity, but because he recognized something rare in her. He had seen determination. He had seen resilience. And in his world, those qualities matter more than any resume ever could. It didn't take long to find her. A few phone calls, a favor owed, and by afternoon, Adrian stood once again at the threshold of Elena's world. She was leaving the hospital, Daniel bundled safely in her arms when she saw him. For a moment, she froze, half in disbelief, half in unease. He looked out of place there among the weary families and antiseptic hallways. His presence was sharp, commanding, the kind of presence that drew every eye, but when his gaze met hers, it softened. "Elena," he said quietly, stepping closer, "how's your son?" Her instinct was to hold Daniel tighter, though she quickly caught herself. "He's better," she answered cautiously. "The doctor said the fever's down. He just needs rest now." Relief flickered across Adrian's face. He nodded, almost to himself, before speaking again. "I'm glad to hear that." There was a pause, one of those silences heavy with unspoken thoughts. Then, with the same calm conviction he had shown the night before, Adrian continued, "I know you don't know me, and I know last night was unusual, but I saw something in you, the way you fought for your son, the strength it took just to keep moving forward. That kind of determination is rare." Elena frowned slightly, unsure where this was going. She had grown accustomed to polite words, the kind people offer before turning away, leaving her to face her struggles alone. But this man's tone was different. He wasn't speaking out of courtesy. He was speaking out of recognition. Adrian drew a quiet breath, then said the words that would shift her path. I want to offer you a position. At my company. Flexible hours. Enough for you to care for your son. And work that matches your skills. Not charity, he added firmly, seeing the protest already forming in her eyes. Opportunity. You've proven you have the drive. All I'm asking is that you let me help open a door. Elena's chest tightened. She wasn't sure whether to feel grateful, suspicious, or overwhelmed. Offers like this didn't just appear. Life had taught her to question kindness when it came too easily. I can't accept pity, she whispered, her voice low but steady. Adrian's expression softened. This isn't pity. It's respect. He held her gaze, unwavering. I don't hand out chances like this lightly. I believe in what I saw in you. And I think you deserve the chance to prove it, not just to me, but to yourself. The world seemed to still around her. The bustle of the hospital faded, the chatter and footsteps slipping into silence. All Elena could hear was the sound of her own heartbeat, pounding with fear and possibility. For years, she had fought every battle alone. For years, she had carried the weight of survival on her shoulders. And now, here stood a man offering something she had almost forgotten how to hope for, a way forward. She didn't answer right away. Her arms tightened around Daniel, her eyes falling to his peaceful face. He deserved more than struggle. He deserved a future. When she finally looked back up at Adrian, her voice trembled, but her words were clear. I'll think about it. Adrian nodded, accepting that for now. That's all I ask. And as he walked away, Elena stood there in the doorway of the hospital. Her son nestled safely in her arms, her heart torn between fear and the first flicker of something else. Something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope. Elena Carter had never stepped foot inside a building like this before. The glass tower loomed above her, its windows reflecting the midday sun, gleaming like a symbol of a world she had only ever seen from a distance. For years, she had walked past places like this, on her way to buses, to markets, to secondhand shops, always from the outside, never imagining she might one day belong inside. Now, here she was. Her steps were hesitant as she pushed through the revolving doors. The lobby opened before her like something out of another life. Polished marble floors, high ceilings with light pouring in, the quiet hum of people moving with purpose. Men and women in pressed suits walked briskly past, badges clipped neatly to their jackets, eyes focused on schedules and screens. Elena tightened her grip on the strap of her bag. She had dressed carefully that morning. Nothing extravagant, just a clean blouse, pressed trousers, and the quiet dignity of someone who had fought hard for every chance she had. Still, she felt out of place, a small figure stepping into a world that didn't seem built for her. But then she reminded herself why she was here. For Daniel, for the future he deserved. That thought steadied her. At the reception desk, a woman with a bright smile greeted her warmly. "You must be Elena," she said, as if she'd been expecting her. "Mr. Blake asked me to show you around." Hearing his name brought back the memory of Rain, of that night, of the way he had looked at her not with pity, but with recognition. The thought gave her strength. She followed the receptionist through the building. They passed open office spaces filled with quiet energy, keyboards clicking, phones ringing softly, conversations hushed but purposeful. Elena noticed the order of it all, the rhythm. It was so different from the chaos she knew, so different from the cluttered kitchens of late-night shifts, from the noise of crowded buses. And then they reached an office, his office. Adrian Blake stood by the window, sunlight outlining his tall frame. He turned as she entered, his blue eyes meeting hers with that same steady calm she remembered. "Elena," he said with a small nod, "I'm glad you came." Her voice caught slightly, but she managed, "I almost didn't." "I know," he admitted, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "But you did. That's what matters." He gestured for her to sit. The conversation that followed was simple, yet layered with meaning. He explained the role, administrative work, flexible hours, the option to leave whenever Daniel needed her. He emphasized that it wasn't about charity. He needed someone reliable, someone capable, and he believed she could be both. As she listened, Elena's doubts war with her hope. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe she deserved this chance. And when she finally nodded, accepting, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Possibility. The days that followed were not easy. The first week, Elena found herself overwhelmed by the pace of the office, by the technology, by the endless flow of documents and tasks. But she learned quickly. Every evening, after Daniel was asleep, she studied. Notes she had scribbled during the day, computer shortcuts she wanted to remember, business terms she had overheard. Piece by piece, she built confidence. And Adrian noticed, from his place at the head of the company, he often saw employees come and go, some bright with promise, others fading quickly under pressure. But Elena was different. She carried with her a quiet focus, a determination he rarely saw. When she made mistakes, she didn't collapse under them. She adapted, learned, and pressed forward. One afternoon, as he passed her desk, he paused. She was bent over a stack of files, her brow furrowed, her pen moving quickly across the page. She didn't notice him at first, so absorbed was she in the task. And in that moment, Adrian felt something stir again, the same feeling from that night in the rain. Respect, admiration. For Elena, the work was more than just a job. It was a lifeline. Each paycheck meant stability. Each completed task meant pride. And though she still rushed home each evening to care for Daniel, though exhaustion still tugged at her edges, she carried herself differently now. Lighter, stronger. The company began to feel less like a world that didn't belong to her, and more like a place where she could stand tall. A place where she was not invisible, but seen. And slowly, quietly, something else began to grow. An unspoken connection between the woman who had spent her life surviving and the man who had everything, yet had never truly seen until he saw her. Neither of them said it aloud, not yet, but in the way his gaze lingered a moment too long when he passed her desk, in the way her voice softened when she thanked him for even the smallest gestures. It was there, unfolding, quietly, in the heart of a company built on ambition, yet transformed by something far more human. This was the beginning. Not just a work, not just a stability, but of something neither of them had expected, a new chapter. The weeks slipped quietly into months, and in that time, something subtle began to take shape. It wasn't loud, it wasn't obvious, and neither of them spoke of it directly, but it was there, threading its way through stolen moments, unspoken glances, and the kind of silences that carried more weight than words ever could. For Elena, life was still a careful balancing act. She woke early, prepared Daniel for school, worked her hours at the company, then hurried home to be with him each evening. But there was a difference now, a lightness she hadn't carried before, because in those hours at the office, she was no longer just a woman surviving. She was becoming someone who belonged, and much of that came from him, Adrian Blake. So often the picture of control, the man who commanded every room he entered, seemed different when he was near her. At first, their exchanges were brief. A nod of approval when she finished a project. A simple, well done, that carried more meaning than the words themselves. But slowly, almost without realizing it, those moments began to stretch. One afternoon, she stayed late, papers spread across her desk, determined to finish a report that had challenged her. The office was nearly empty. The usual hum of voices and phones faded into silence. She didn't notice Adrian at first, didn't see him standing at the doorway, watching her in quiet thought. "You're still here," he said finally, his voice gentle in the stillness. Elena startled, looking up. I just wanted to finish this. I don't like leaving things half done." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "That's what I noticed about you from the beginning," he replied. "You don't give up." He stepped closer, resting a hand lightly on the back of the chair across from her desk. For a moment, the polished CEO disappeared and there was just a man, curious, quietly admiring, his gaze softened by something deeper. Moments like that became more frequent. They began sharing coffee in the mornings when the office was still waking. Sometimes he'd ask about Daniel, genuine questions not out of politeness, but because he truly wanted to know. And Elena, cautious at first, found herself opening up. She told him about Daniel's love of drawing, about the way he laughed at the smallest things, about her fears on nights when he grew sick. Adrian listened, really listened, and in his silence, she felt seen in a way she hadn't in years. There were other moments too, small, fleeting, but meaningful. A lunch shared in the break room when the cafeteria was too crowded. A late evening when the two of them stood by the window of his office. The city stretched out below them, neither speaking for a long time because words felt unnecessary. Elena began to notice things about him she hadn't before. How his voice softened when he spoke of his younger sister, who lived across the country. How he sometimes paused mid-sentence, as if weighing whether to reveal more of himself. How, despite his wealth, his laughter, rare as it was, felt genuine, unpolished, even boyish. And Adrian found himself drawn to her strength, but also to her warmth, to the way she carried herself with grace even when exhausted, to the way she placed her son's needs above all else, to the way she never seemed impressed by his status or money, because to Elena, those things didn't matter. In her presence, he felt grounded, human. There was no grand declaration, no dramatic moment of realization, just a quiet unfolding of trust, like a flower slowly opening to the sun. One evening, as they walked out of the building together, Elena holding her coat tightly against the chill, Adrian glanced at her and said softly, "I can't remember the last time I looked forward to leaving work until now." She turned, surprised by the admission, her breath catching slightly. She didn't reply, not with words, at least. But the faint smile that touched her lips said more than enough. These were the quiet moments, the ones that seemed small to the world. But for them, they were everything. Because it was in those silences, those simple conversations, that something fragile and undeniable was beginning to grow. And though neither of them would name it yet, both felt it. The bond that had begun to reign was deepening, shaping itself into something neither expected, but both were slowly learning to need. Elena had always believed that good things came with a cost. Life had taught her that nothing arrived without a shadow, that joy was often followed by something that threatened to take it away. And so, even as her days at the company grew brighter, even as her bond with Adrian quietly deepened, a quiet unease began to stir inside her. It started small whispers in the office hallways. Colleagues who noticed the way Adrian's gaze lingered a little longer when he passed her desk. The way his tone softened when he spoke her name. At first, she brushed it off. But soon, the hushed voices seemed louder, their meanings harder to ignore. She's only been here a few weeks, and already she has his attention. Do you think that's why he hired her? Some people are lucky, others just work. The words stung. Not because they were true, but because they questioned everything she had fought so hard to prove. That she had earned her place, that she belonged. At night, after Daniel was asleep, Elena sat alone in the quiet of her small apartment, staring at the glow of a single lamp. She thought about the looks, the whispers, the way her chest tightened whenever she caught herself smiling too much at something Adrian said. She thought about the risk of allowing herself to feel, of letting her guard down after years of surviving by keeping her walls high. What if people were right? What if her presence in his world was only tolerated because he pitted her? What if she was blind to the truth, reading too much into kindness that meant nothing beyond courtesy? And beneath those fears lay an even deeper one. What if she failed? Not just at the job, but at protecting her heart. Because she knew if she let Adrian in, if she let herself believe in the connection between them, it would mean trusting someone again. Something she hadn't dared to do since the day she had been left alone with a baby in her arms and a future that had collapsed overnight. Adrian, on his side, felt the shift too. He noticed how Elena's laughter grew less frequent, how she pulled back when their conversations drifted into more personal waters. He saw the hesitation in her eyes, the way she seemed to wrestle with something unspoken whenever they were alone. One evening, as they stayed late finishing a project, he finally addressed it. "You've been quiet lately," he said gently, watching her from across the desk. Elena hesitated, pen poised above her notes. "I've just been tired," she murmured, her voice thin, unconvincing. Adrian leaned forward slightly. "Is it me?" Her eyes flicked up, startled. "What do you mean?" "Am I making things harder for you?" His voice was calm, but there was an edge of vulnerability in it. Something rare for a man like him. Elena's throat tightened. She wanted to deny it, to smile and say everything was fine. But the truth pressed at her chest, refusing to stay buried. "People talk," she whispered finally. They think the only reason I'm here is because of you, that I didn't earn this. And maybe they're right." Adrian's gaze didn't waver. "Do you believe that?" Her silence was answer enough. For a long moment, neither spoke. The sound of rain against the windows filled the space between them. Then Adrian's voice came, low but steady. "I don't give anyone anything they don't deserve. And I don't waste my time on people who aren't capable. You've proven yourself, Elena, over and over. If others can't see that, it's because they're blinded by their own assumptions, not because of you." His words carried weight, but still, Elena's doubts clung stubbornly. She shook her head, her voice breaking. "It's not just them, Adrian. It's me. I don't know if I can let myself believe in something good again. Every time I have, it's been taken away. And I can't risk breaking. Not when I have Daniel depending on me." Her confession hung in the air, raw and trembling. Adrian leaned back slowly, his expression unreadable. But inside he felt a pang, a realization of just how deep her scars ran. He wanted to reach across the table, to take her hand, to promise that he wasn't going anywhere. But he knew promises weren't what she needed. Not yet. Instead, he simply said, "Then let me earn your trust, not as your boss, not as someone with money or power, just as a man who sees you and respects you." Elena's eyes glistened, though she quickly looked away, afraid of what he might read in them. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Not yet. That night, as she walked home, the city lights blurred through the tears she refused to let fall. She held Daniel's hand a little tighter, her heart caught in a battle between fear and longing, because for the first time in years, she wanted something she wasn't sure she was brave enough to reach for, and that want terrified her more than anything. It happened on a quiet afternoon, one that seemed ordinary at first, the kind of day that slipped easily between the cracks of memory. But for Elena and Adrian, it became the day everything shifted. Daniel had fallen ill again. Not dangerously. Not the way that stormy night had threatened, but enough to keep him home from school. Elena had debated calling out of work, torn between responsibility and the fear of disappointing Adrian. But before she could make the decision, her phone rang. It was him. "Elena," Adrian's voice came gently through the line. "Don't worry about today. Stay with Daniel. That's what matters." She wanted to protest, to insist she could manage both, but something in his tone stopped her. It wasn't an order, wasn't suggestion wrapped in formality. It was care. Simple, direct, undeniable. Later that evening, there was a knock at her apartment door. When Elena opened it, she froze. Adrian stood there, not in his tailored suit, not the polished figure she was used to seeing at the company, but in a simple shirt and jacket, holding a small bag. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said softly. I thought Daniel might like this." Inside the bag was a box of crayons and a sketch pad. Daniel's face lit up in a way Elena hadn't seen all week. He grabbed the crayons eagerly, pulling them out with the innocent joy only a child could hold. "Mom, look," he exclaimed, already bending over the table to start drawing. Elena's heart clenched. She glanced back at Adrian, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. He shrugged slightly, almost sheepishly. "You said he likes to draw." They ended up sitting together at the small kitchen table, Daniel between them, scribbling bright shapes across the paper. The sound of crayons scratching filled the room, punctuated by the boy's laughter as he showed off his creations. For a moment, it felt natural, as if Adrian had always belonged there, in that small apartment, beneath the warm glow of the kitchen light. When Daniel finally grew tired and drifted asleep on the couch, Elena and Adrian remained. The silence between them wasn't heavy this time. It was alive, filled with unspoken words. She broke it first, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't understand you." Adrian's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "You're a CEO," she said, shaking her head. "You could be anywhere right now, with anyone, And yet, here you are, sitting in a tiny apartment with a tired single mom and her sick child. Why? He leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers. Because this is where I want to be. The word struck her like a current, sharp and undeniable. She opened her mouth to respond, but emotion tangled her voice. For so long, she had built walls around her heart, her trust, her very sense of safety. And now, in a single sentence, he had slipped past them. "Elena," Adrian continued, his tone steady but laced with something vulnerable, "I know you've been hurt. I know you've learned to carry everything on your own because you had no choice. But I need you to know something. You don't have to do it alone anymore. Not if you don't want to." Her hands trembled in her lap. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let the warmth of his words sink into the cracks where loneliness had lived for so long. But fear still clung to her. "What if I can't?" she whispered. "What if I let myself trust you and then I'll be here," he interrupted softly. "Not because I feel sorry for you, not because of obligation, but because I choose to be." The silence that followed was thick with emotion. Elena felt the weight of years pressing against her. Years of struggle, of mistrust, of waiting for the other shoe to drop. And yet, as she looked at him, sitting there in her small kitchen with sincerity written across every line of his face, something inside her shifted. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "I'm scared, Adrian." He reached across the table slowly, deliberately, giving her every chance to pull away. When his hand finally covered hers, his touch was warm, grounding. "So am I," he admitted. "But maybe that's how we know it's real." Tears filled her eyes, though a faint, trembling smile curved her lips. For the first time in years, she felt the possibility of hope. Fragile, yes, but alive. And in that moment, Elena Carter, who had survived so much by carrying the world alone, allowed herself to believe, to trust. It wasn't a grand confession shouted in the rain, nor a sweeping declaration of love. It was quieter, gentler. Two hearts meeting in honesty, in fear, in fragile courage. But it was enough. It was a turning point. The world didn't change overnight. There were still challenges, still long days and tired nights. Elena still woke early to pack Daniel's lunch, still hurried between responsibilities, still carried the weight of motherhood on her shoulders. But something was different now. The burden no longer felt like hers alone, because slowly, gently, Adrian had become part of their lives. It began in the smallest ways. He'd stop by with coffee in the mornings, leaving it on her desk with a quiet smile. He'd check in on Daniel, asking what he was drawing that week, pretending to be amazed by stick figures and bright crayon houses. And in the evenings, when the office lights dimmed and most had gone home, Elena and Adrian would linger, sometimes finishing work, sometimes simply talking, sometimes just sitting in companionable silence. For Elena, it was strange at first, to feel safe, to feel seen, to allow herself not only to trust but to lean just a little on someone else. And for Adrian, it was just as new, to step away from a life defined by business deals and boardrooms, and into a life where what mattered most was laughter at a kitchen table or the small hand a child slipping into his without hesitation. One Saturday morning, the three of them found themselves at the park. The sky was clear, the air crisp with the promise of spring. Daniel darted across the grass, his laughter ringing out as he chased after a kite Adrian had helped him build. Elena stood nearby, her arms crossed against the breeze, watching the two of them. She saw Adrian smile as he jogged beside her son, steadying the kite string with patient hands. She saw the ease with which Daniel reached for him, the trust that had formed so naturally. And in that moment, something in her chest swelled, something both tender and overwhelming. Adrian returned to her side, slightly out of breath, his hair ruffled by the wind. "He's going to fly that thing straight into the clouds," he said with a laugh. Elena glanced at Daniel, then back at Adrian. Her voice softened. "He already thinks you hung the stars." The words slipped out before she could stop them, and when she realized what she had said, her cheeks flushed with the weight of it. But Adrian didn't tease, didn't laugh. He simply looked at her, really looked, and for a heartbeat, it felt as though the world had narrowed to just the two of them. Elena, he said quietly, almost as if afraid to break the spell. "I know I've said it before, but I need you to hear it now. I don't see you as someone I saved on a rainy night. I see you as someone I admire, someone I care for." Her breath caught. For a moment, every old fear, every wall she built, threatened to rise again. But then she felt the warmth of his hand brushing against hers, tentative but steady. And she remembered the nights he had been there, the trust he had earned piece by piece, the way Daniel's laughter always grew brighter when Adrian was near. This time, she didn't pull away. Her fingers laced with his, and though her eyes glistened, her voice was steady. "I care for you too, Adrian, more than I thought I could." The confession hung in the air, fragile and beautiful, before settling between them like something permanent. And just then, Daniel came running back, the kite trailing behind him, his cheeks flushed with excitement. "Mom, Adrian, did you see?" It almost touched the sky. They both turned toward him, their hands still joined. Elena's heart swelled at the sight. Her son, happy and carefree, the man beside her steady and present. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was standing at the edge of survival. She felt like she was standing at the beginning of something new, a new chapter, not just for her, not just for Adrian, but for all three of them. And as the kite lifted once more into the sky, carried higher by the wind, Elena realized that perhaps, just perhaps, her life was finally learning how to soar too. And so, what began as a rainy evening of struggle became the start of a new chapter, a story of kindness, trust, and unexpected love. If this touched your heart, make sure to subscribe to Heartfelt Tales TV, where we bring you more stories that remind us of the power of compassion and second chances. Until next time, keep believing in the beauty of small acts that change lives.